Welcome, everybody. This is the Common Good Candidates podcast, where we have conversations with some of the extraordinary, ordinary Americans who are running for office. No matter how you might feel about who's at the top of the ticket, there's reason to be excited about people that are down ballot. And this podcast is about getting to know some of those people all over the country, up and down the ballot, people who've raised their hand and said, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to jump in and be a part of this, and I'm going to run for office. And we want to give you a chance to get to know them a bit. So today, on our very first episode, we are packing our bags and we are headed to the Pacific Northwest to talk with Kaylee Peterson, who is running for U.S. Congress in the western part of Idaho. This is a great conversation. Kaylee's an exciting candidate that you're absolutely going to love. So buckle up and enjoy. Here's our conversation with Kaylee Peterson. Today we are having conversation with Kaylee Peterson, who's running for Congress in Idaho. Kaylee, welcome to the Common Good Candidates podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor just to be a Common Good candidate, but to be here and talking about the race is exciting.
Fantastic. Hey, let's begin with the end in mind. It's November 6th. What have you accomplished? What are you proud of? What are you feeling?
I think I'm probably asleep, but other than that, I really want to show Idahoans that we can move the needle. I think that Idaho has been in this supermajority for so long that so many people don't even make it out to the polls because they don't believe that change is possible. And so when I use my slogan, Believe in Better, I'm asking people to believe that they can have an impact on the system, that their vote counts, and that when we come together as a community, just really focused on good policy, that we can get the representation we deserve. So hopefully November 6th, Idahoans can see the impact that their vote makes and really that they have a voice in Idaho politics.
Mm-hmm. When you say move the needle, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, honestly, a federal Democrat in my race is not supposed to get more than 27% of the vote. It's been that way for a very long time. And so our goal, we always knew this was a long-term campaign, that this district was going to take long-term investment. So obviously we want to win. And there is a path to success. But even if we can get 38%, 45%, 50%, any way that we can move that needle, we can show people that the path to success is there and really that their investment is not wasted.
Yeah. And it's so important. I often talk with candidates about how, in so many parts of the country, this is like a long-term project, and far too many candidates and campaigns, it's a little bit like visiting a park where, you see that sign that says leave no trace, make it look like you were never here. And far too many candidates and campaigns leave no trace. And the next time somebody else is just starting from scratch, and changing the political landscape is about building the kind of political infrastructure that can make a difference, moving the needle and keeping it there so that the next time when you move the needle, we're even closer.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's one of the first things we recognized is that we've had some really phenomenal candidates step up in this race. But then when they leave, all of the money that they raised, all of the effort, all the field, everything they organized is just gone. And so I think when we originally committed, we were like, I can spend the next 4 to 6 years of my life doing this. That's how long it was going to take me to get my degrees. That's how long I think I can keep this up 24/7. But then we realized that people were excited from all across the political spectrum to get involved in something that actually was doing the work and was a long-term investment into the district that they care about. And so that's the plan, and it's going swimmingly, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great to hear. Now, you're not a career politician. You're a mom, you're a wife, you've been a student. Are you still a student? You know, you live on the land that your family has lived on for generations. How did you decide to run for Congress?
I feel like I was almost made for this position because I'm not a career politician. I don't have any pedigree or status, but I am a huge policy nerd. I've been political my entire life. I got started. Anybody who's ever heard me speak knows that I got my start when I was 8 years old, writing the Clinton administration, criticizing their handling of Kosovo. So I was that kid.
Wait, time out, time out, time out. You were okay. You're 8 years old, and you wrote a letter to the Clinton administration criticizing their handling of Kosovo.
I did. I also wrote all of my state senators at the time.
Amazing.
I still remember getting one letter back, and I've never shared this story publicly. I split my childhood between Idaho and Connecticut. So I wrote the senators
Hmm.
for both. And one of the Connecticut senators, a woman, wrote me back and basically said, "Your parents need to put you in your place. Who do you think you are? How dare you write to your congresswoman saying these kinds of things?" And I don't know if that's maybe the competitive spirit in me kicked off, and that's why I've been political my entire life. But I've just always cared. I really truly thought, though, that
Yeah.
without the pedigree, without the status, without being independently wealthy,
Mm.
that running for office was never in the cards for me. When I started college the freshman year, I was actually asked several times if I ever plan to run for office. I don't know if it's just the way I speak or how political I am in my everyday life. And I always said, "There's no way. No one would ever want me to run for office." And then when I found out that no one else was willing to do it, that there
Mm.
really was this incredible need in rural communities for candidates to just put their name on the ballot, I said, "Well, I can do that. I know I can put in the work. I know I can communicate. I know I can reach across the aisle, and that's what I can offer this district." And boy, has it just completely taken off in a way I never expected.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, have you seen the meme that, that suggests that, like, on a Friday night, a group of friends should get together and do like a PowerPoint presentation about what each of them do for work? Because
Yeah.
like nobody knows what their friends do for work. Um, like, what does a congressional candidate do all day?
I think in Idaho, it might look a little different than in other states that might have more infrastructure because my daily life is kind of organizing both field and comms and messaging and where there might be other states that have trained campaign staff and a lot of political experience and knowledge that they're coming from. We're really trying to instill that experience and knowledge in new volunteers and new staff and
Mm.
new organizers. So a lot of my daily life looks like, one, making calls to national organizations and national contacts that I think can provide experience and resources. It's also traveling. I mean, I've gone 44,000 miles just in
Mm.
2024 driving up and down my district. So a lot of it is done in my car. It's a hybrid Toyota, so I get great gas mileage, and we named her
Excellent.
Betty White, so it's a lot of fun to drive. But and then a lot of it is stopping in communities, talking to community leaders, organizers, new volunteers, really hyping them up so that they see that this is possible. They focus on good policy because I think that's our success going forward. People are done with social media sound bites. They're done with leadership figures using fear and anger and rhetoric to try and stir people to the polls. They just want common sense policy. They just want leadership that's going to step up, do the work, and get the solutions that they need done. So a lot of my job is getting into communities and talking to people about that every day. But it's like a 17-hour day on
Yeah.
on average.
Yeah. Wow. Uh, when I ran for Congress in 2018, and I was out knocking on thousands of doors, I was shocked at how many people in May still had their Christmas decorations up. Like, I mean, at least one in every 10 houses. Any surprises on the campaign trail? Anything that, like, you're just like, wow, I can't believe this is something I had no idea that it was this way, and it totally surprises me.
The funniest surprise to me, being someone who is so politically focused and minded, even though I wasn't involved in the political system at all, was how much people have written off politics
Mm.
and
Mm.
government. So when I'm going door to door and I have these issues where I'm hearing that the Supreme Court has just ruled that the president has complete immunity, or we just found out that the Idaho state legislature has completely banned abortions, even in cases of emergency. All of these different things that seem like big topic issues to me. For everyday working class Idahoans, they're focused on their families and their job and their life and how they're going to afford rent and groceries. So these kinds of policy issues aren't really something that they're aware of. And that was a huge surprise and
Mm.
something I had to keep in mind when I'm going into communities that don't normally show up to the polls. That's something I really had to keep at the front of mind.
Yeah. Tell us about Russ Fulcher, who is your opponent in this race.
Yeah, I when I first volunteered to run, they asked if you could run any campaign in Idaho, what would you do? And I said I would run against Russ Fulcher.
Mm.
So he was a state senator for about a decade. He's in commercial real estate. In 2018, he made a run for governor. And when somebody else in his party decided to run, they kind of did a handshake deal, and Fulcher went for the US House. He was
Mm.
elected in 2018. He went to DC and immediately joined the Freedom Caucus. And that's really been the entirety of his tenure as a congressman, has been voting in line with Jim Jordan, with the Freedom Caucus, with Trump's administration. So it's frustrating because you see this man who has every power and privilege, and yet he voted against veterans with the PACT Act and the VA Service Recognition Act. He voted against affordable insulin. He voted against the Infrastructure Act, which has brought, I think, we were just talking about how bad my internet service is for this podcast interview. The Infrastructure Act has brought $500 million in broadband investment into the state. And
Mm.
then you have the Inflation Reduction Act. He voted against federal firefighters. I mean, he's just going along party lines, and he usually uses a lot of fear and anger-based rhetoric to kind of keep his supporters angry enough to vote. So that's where we're at, I think, with
Yeah.
what he's doing.
Yeah, there's so many there's so many people around the country that are familiar with like the big name people like Jim Jordan or a Marjorie Taylor Greene or a Matt Gaetz or a Lauren Boebert. And for all of those people that are kind of the face of the extremism in the House of Representatives, they're only able to do that because they have rank and file no names behind them who supporting them, giving them some clout and some cover in what they're doing. And like it might be like, I don't know, really sexy to run against, somebody like Jim Jordan, like Tammy Wilson's doing in Ohio. But Jim Jordan gets a lot of his power because of people like Russ Fulcher.
And I think that's where I wish I could, if I could shoot any message into every American home, it's how incredibly dangerous the people behind the scenes are. I mean,
Mm.
when you look at what Russ Fulcher does on the trail, there is no press, there is no media. He's not yelling it on social media. So one of the things that we started doing was we started promoting his events for all community members, not just as donors, not just the people in the Freedom Foundation email
Love
list, but so that every community member could attend his town halls. And then we live streamed what he was saying on our social media. And what he says when he doesn't realize people are watching is terrifying. He did an event in Kamiah where he was asked about the January 6th prisoners of war. And he talked about how
it.
corrupt the FBI and the DOJ is, and how they had wanted his phone because of his text messages with Donald Trump, but he put a bullet through that phone. And this is a sitting congressman. He did a high school graduation here locally where he talked about how today's politics are about good versus evil, and the evils of the LGBTQIA community, the evils of the socialist democratic left. And then he talked about how our Constitution and the Bible are basically the same document. So I think if people understood really how linked these extremist groups are with our sitting congressmen in rural areas like Idaho, I think it would be a huge motivation to the polls.
Yeah. And Russ Fulcher's one of those Congress people that voted against certifying the election in 2020. That's enough talk about him. There's
Yeah.
lots of reasons why Kaylee would be a much better representative in DC than her opponent. So let me ask you this: your district is a border district, and yet there is, I don't think there's a border wall up there at the top. How do you keep your district from being overrun by illegal Canadians if there's no border wall?
I mean, it's a huge issue. You talk to any community in North Idaho, and they're talking about how overrun they are with these illegal Canadians. No, it is just it's unbelievably frustrating. My opponent has talked nonstop about the southern border, even though it really has very little impact. And what's frustrating to me is there are real policy solutions to what's happening at the southern border. We saw
Mhm.
economic and environmental turmoil in South and Central America drive migration towards the southern border. This started under the Trump administration. It's continued into the Biden administration. There are very real things we can do to fix the issues that we see, and yet my opponent has used statistics from a certified hate group. He tried to say we spend, I think, $500 billion on illegal immigration each year, and just there's no basis in truth or fact when we talk about border situations. So for Idaho, it's water rights, it's fire
Mm.
mitigation, it's property taxes, it's wages, it's employment, it's pensions. So I like to focus on those issues.
Yeah, that's great. So you
Mhm.
mentioned water rights. You mentioned uh, fires. Let's talk a little bit about climate. And Western Idaho is one of those really amazingly beautiful places in the United States where people kind of live on the land, have a great appreciation for that, and take a lot of pride in that. How do people think about climate there in Idaho? What the climate crisis? What kind of impact is it having? Is that an issue that is kind of getting through to traditionally Republican voters who maybe haven't thought about it? Like, is it coming home in a way that might move some folks on climate? And how do you talk about that?
It really depends. It's frustrating because Idaho's congressional delegation and the leadership we have not taken climate seriously. So when I'm talking to really millennial, Gen Z, and Gen A, climate crisis is a top topic of conversation. But when I'm talking to rural Republican communities, it's the same issues from a different lens, right? So when I'm talking, we're a very union labor first kind of campaign. We work with all the different unions across the state. So for
Mhm.
them, it's the clean energy contracts that we're missing out on here in Idaho that would be incredible for Idaho laborers. It's, the kind of job opportunities and economic opportunities that would really help stimulate local economies that have been struggling for the last 15 years. But for our forest service, for our wilderness, for our sportsmen, it is about fire and water. And they're starting to see the impacts of climate crisis far more. So it is becoming more of a topic of conversation. It's just how do we frame these discussions?
Have you found any way to kind of crack that code at all?
It's just focusing on the policy itself.
Mm.
So it's focusing, if you're worried about fire and water, then why are we defunding the federal agencies that help land management? If we're worried about fire mitigation, why aren't we passing legislation that helps fund the innovative programs that we've come up with in this for clean energy contracts? It's like, well, you know what? I 100% believe that we need to be investing in new energy, domestic energy options, which will bring in contracts and opportunities
Mhm.
and really stimulate local economies. So when we focus on the policy solutions, that's really how we kind of avoid the social media division and rhetoric.
Yeah, that's great. Uh, Idaho is one of those states that I've never been to. I've been to most of the states in the union, but I've never been to Idaho. Uh, I know potatoes. I know the blue turf on the field at Boise State. Uh, what else do we need to know about Idaho?
Oh, it is unbelievably diverse. I mean, when I drive through my district, it is like driving through 5 different states. You have everything from the Palouse to the Pacific Northwest and lakes and waterways. You've got the mountains for climbing. You've got our city centers. I live only 30 minutes outside of Boise, where we have the incredible arts. And then you can just walk into the foothills and go mountain biking. So it is this stunning area. And I think 98% of Idahoans think that our beautiful wilderness and outdoors is the key to their quality of life. So we are an outdoorsy state. But we are so much more than potatoes. Honestly, we have a ton of tech. So, ironically, I
Mm.
think semiconductors are one of our biggest exports, along with like wheat and potatoes and our agriculture. But
Yeah.
really, it's just we are a massive, massive state, and each community has their own issues that they're dealing with, which why
Mm.
is why I think it's so important we have candidates that are willing to go show face and willing to actually get to know these communities, willing to have a presence in these communities so that they can better represent their issues.
Yeah. You mentioned it, Idaho being a massive state. And, when I look at the map, your district is got to be one of the longest districts in the country. What do you know what the mileage is from one end to the other? And for those maybe who are listening on the podcast, if you're watching online, you can see a map. But for those of you that might be listening on the podcast, you picture Idaho and it's got like that smokestack, that really high, I don't know what y'all call it, if it's a panhandle or what you call it, the really tall section of Idaho. Kaylee's district is that. It's like the whole western side of Idaho from one end of the state to the other.
Yeah, it's around 500 miles. It goes from the Canadian border down to the Nevada border. I like to say it's all of North and Central Idaho, and then the southwest strip of the state. Ironically, they cut Ada County in half, which is the county that I live in. So all of the liberal voters in downtown Boise and our capital are not my district. So
Mhm.
West Ada, where we have far more Republican voters, that is my district. But it's 19 counties, it's 996,000 people. I've driven, I think we're at 85,000 miles since I started the campaign,
Wow.
44,000 miles this year. Thankfully, like I said, I drive a Toyota. So it's
Yeah.
an incredibly
Yeah.
reliable car. It gets me from
Yeah.
point A to point B.
Well, here's the other thing about Idaho that I love. Idaho is the only state in the country where 100% of its Democratic candidates for Congress are candidates for common good. You and David Roth, who's running in Idaho's other district, both are candidates for common good, and just absolutely love that. Uh, so with our work at Vote Common Good, we ask voters to use the common good as their voting criteria. And we ask people that are running for office that if they're elected, they'll use the common good as their governing criteria. So it's not necessarily about everybody agreeing on every policy issue. It's much more a shared set of values. I'm curious, what the common good means to you when you hear that phrase, when you think, oh, I'm a candidate for common good. What comes to mind? How does that resonate with you?
Well, in a state where we do have a lot of division and political aggression, that phrase, the common good, means so much to me. In a time when we have leaders who are trying to paint 50% of the country as our enemy, I am in communities really reminding them that they're your neighbors, your coworkers, your friends, your grocery store attendant, your gas station clerk. They are the people that you know in your community, and really just trying to focus on, I use the word common values a lot. We all want the same things in life. We all want economic opportunity, safety for our families. We want our kids to have a good education. We all want safe roads to drive on at night. And when we really focus on government being the kind of tool and resource we have to make our communities safe and and make our communities the kind of American dream that we all have in mind, that's where we can really have successful leadership and successful policy. So common good to me is, how do we all sit down at the table and find solutions that work for all of us in a way that is productive and positive and really kind of shows us the humanity in one another.
Mm, well said. With all, it seems like the political bad news can be an onslaught. And, for those people that are paying attention, that are, you know, political junkies like you are, like I am, um, I, I imagine it's easy to get discouraged. How do you stay positive?
For me, when I was a stay-at-home mom, I am in a very aggressively far-right area, and I really did think I was alone. I remember dropping my daughter off at school and there being several vehicles with QAnon stickers, and I felt so isolated, and I felt like the world was a lot more hopeless. And then I started this campaign. And as I drove up and down the district, it didn't matter if you're Republican, Independent, Democrat. I met so many people who thought like I did, who wanted the same things that I did, who were committed to doing the work in their communities, and seeing how many of us there really were. And I really think that these campaigns across America are all about reaching more people who are sitting at home feeling exactly the same way that I did, who don't think their vote matters, who don't think their voice counts, and showing them that we really do have the numbers. I mean, when I look at Idaho and our demographics, we have the numbers to win if people really believed that their vote mattered and that they could be a part of community that would bring them the results they're hoping for. So it has brought so much hope to me personally, that I hope to share that optimism and hope with every voter that I come in contact with.
Mm, and I'm just from this conversation, I'm sure that it just oozes out of you and is contagious in all the best ways. Uh, how can people find you? How can people help? What do you need?
Thankfully, I'm the only Kaylee running for Congress. So if you go to Kaylee for Congress online, I'm it. It's KayleeFor Congress.com is our website. We have so many different ways to get involved. We have bi-monthly Zoom meetings where we phone bank, text bank, and talk about our efforts across the state and country. We also always need people to do postcards. I really wish people understood how tremendously helpful social media is for candidates who don't have $1 million to do advertising. So if everybody listening to this podcast went to our social media, whatever platforms, we're on every platform, and shared, liked, followed our page, it helps us reach so many more people. And obviously donating. I mean, most campaigns run with $1 to $3 million in a non-competitive race. I ran with 70,000 in 2022. And I like to imagine if just 60,000 people across the country gave $5, we could outraise Fulcher in one day. And I like to imagine what his campaign staff and all of his donors would think about that. So those are the ways that you can help and get involved.
Let's make that happen. So KayleeForCongress.com. It's KAYLEE for Congress.com, all spelled out. Kaylee, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I am so grateful that Vote Common Good has spent so much time in our state and invested so much attention and resources into the candidates that are running here. So I look forward to working together.
Awesome. Hey, thanks everyone for listening in on this conversation with Kaylee Peterson, candidate for Congress in Idaho's 1st Congressional District. Conversations like this are going to be happening every Wednesday between now and Election Day, where we get to introduce you to some of the extraordinary, ordinary Americans who are running for Congress. So tune in right here, wherever you are, on the Vote Common Good podcast network. Again, you can learn more about Kaylee and all of the other candidates for Common Good by visiting candidatesforcommongood.com.